Questions orales, oral questions. The honourable member for Calgary-Midnapore.
In a feat of completely unprecedented fiscal incompetence, this government has taken us from a surplus to a $10 billion deficit and now to a $30 billion deficit. It's clear as day that the Liberals misled Canadians in the last election with their bogus fiscal promises. So my question is simple, Mr. Speaker. Why did the Liberals hide the truth about their agenda to massively expand the cost of government and to run huge and growing deficits?
Mr. Speaker, first, it's Friday, so let me salute my family, which is in the gallery today, and let me go.
Honourable members, I'm delighted the member's family is in the gallery, but members should know that only the Speaker recognizes people in the gallery. So I asked him to finish his question and stick to the subject matter.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So let me answer to my colleague. Mr. Speaker, we have a plan to grow this economy. On the 19th of October, Canadians made a real choice. They made the choice of growth. Mr. Speaker, we're going to do that with our three principles. We're going to do that responsibly. We're going to continue to reduce our debt to GDP ratio to our mandate. And, Mr. Speaker, it's still our goal to balance the budget, but our objective, our priority is growth, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Calgary-Midnapore.
Mais, Monsieur le Président, ça c'est exactement le point. Les Canadiens ont fait un choix basé sur un faux engagement électoral de ce gouvernement. Un engagement pour un déficit de seulement de 10 milliards de dollars qui a triplé en 3 mois. N'est-il pas vrai que les libéraux ont mené les Canadiens en erreur pendant la campagne électorale et pourquoi est-ce qu'ils ont caché leur vraie intention d'augmenter massivement le coût du gouvernement et les déficits?
L'honorable secrétaire parlementaire.
Monsieur le Président, je voudrais remercier mon honorable collègue pour sa question. Les seuls qui ne comprennent pas, Monsieur le Président, que les conservateurs nous ont laissé un déficit, c'est les conservateurs, Monsieur le Président. Tout le monde au Canada comprend ça, Monsieur le Président. Nous avons un plan pour la croissance, Monsieur le Président, et les Canadiens ont fait ce choix-là le 19 octobre. Monsieur le Président, nous allons continuer. Nous avons commencé en décembre en réduisant l'impôt pour la classe moyenne. Nous allons continuer dans le budget avec l'allocation canadienne de nos enfants. Et, Monsieur le Président, nous allons mettre en place notre plan historique pour l'infrastructure. Ça, c'est travailler pour les Canadiens, Monsieur le Président.
Honorable député de Calgary-Midnapore.
Moi, là, Monsieur le Président, je n'ai jamais vu une secrétaire parlementaire qui s'est attaquée à son propre ministère, qui a dit qu'il y a un budget équilibré. But, Mr. Speaker, not only are the Liberals blowing Canada's hard-won surplus, now they plan to help their Ontario Liberal friends to impose a new job-killing payroll tax and a new tax on everything, a tax on carbon. All of that means fewer jobs and lower income. So, Mr. Speaker, why in the world would the Liberals be killing jobs through higher taxes, particularly at a time of economic fragility?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary for the Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, the only one who don't understand that 2 months doesn't make a year, that 9 months doesn't make a year, but 12 months makes a year are the Conservative. Mr. Speaker, we're going to have a deficit. That's what the Conservative have left us. But thanks to Canadians on the 19th of October, Canadians made the right choice. They made the choice of growth, Mr. Speaker. The IMF said it at the G20. They said we should continue to invest. At times like this, Mr. Speaker, it's the time to invest. That's the choice that Canadians have made. That's what we're going to do.
Honorable député de Lévis-Lobinière.
Monsieur le Président, le gouvernement libéral veut faire croire aux Canadiens que les déficits sont bons pour l'économie. Il est évident que ce premier ministre n'a jamais eu à boucler une fin de mois comme le font des milliers de familles canadiennes. Les familles canadiennes savent que si le gouvernement emprunte de l'argent qu'il n'a pas, cela va nous conduire vers de nouvelles taxes et impôts. Monsieur le Président, quelles taxes et impôts vont augmenter à cause de l'incompétence de ce gouvernement libéral?
L'honorable secrétaire parlementaire.
Monsieur le Président, je remercie mon honorable collègue pour sa question. Nous avons réduit les taxes des Canadiens, Monsieur le Président. Nous l'avons fait au mois de décembre pour 9 millions de Canadiens, Monsieur le Président. Monsieur le Président, nous allons continuer avec un plan de croissance économique. C'est ça que les gens veulent au Canada, Monsieur le Président. Nous allons continuer d'investir dans la productivité, dans l'innovation, dans les infrastructures. Monsieur le Président, dans un moment comme ça, quand les conservateurs nous ont laissé une situation financière lamentable, C'est le temps d'investir. C'est exactement ce qu'on va faire.
L'honorable député de Lévis-Lobinière.
Monsieur le Président, ce genre de réponse de la part du gouvernement me porte à réfléchir sur l'interrogation suivante. Y a-t-il un capitaine sur le Titanic libéral? Ce gouvernement libéral n'a aucun leadership économique et c'est fort inquiétant. Il faut absolument éviter les déficits structurels qui vont venir vers l'imposition de nouvelles taxes et impôts. Monsieur le Président, combien vont devoir débourser les familles pour rembourser ce gâchis libéral?
Honorable secrétaire parlementaire.
Monsieur le Président, je remercie mon honorable collègue. C'est justement les conservateurs qui ont fait couler le bateau économique, Monsieur le Président. Mais grâce à un plan de croissance, Monsieur le Président, et je vais le répéter pour mon honorable collègue en français, Monsieur le Président, nous allons continuer d'investir dans l'économie, Monsieur le Président. Nous allons le faire de façon responsable. Nous allons continuer à réduire notre ratio de la dette sur le PIB durant notre mandat. Nous allons toujours avoir l'objectif de balancer les livres, Monsieur le Président, mais notre priorité, c'est la croissance. C'est le choix que les Canadiens ont fait et c'est ça que nos amis de l'autre côté devraient apprendre. Merci, Monsieur le Président.
The honourable member for New Westminster Burnaby.
Liberals have an appalling record on employment insurance. They took $50 billion from unemployed workers and their families when they raided the EI fund. Then they imposed massive cuts to access. Now, Conservative cuts, of course, made it even worse for those who've lost their jobs. And now less than 4 in 10 unemployed Canadians can access benefits. The Liberals have voted in favour of the following measure before, and they promised to bring it to government. So the question is clear. Will the Liberals create a universal eligibility of 360 hours for all Canadians across the country?
The Honourable Minister of Employment.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. We are in a process of Canadian consultation. It's important that we hear from people from coast to coast to coast to reverse the mean-spirited changes implemented by the previous government that focused on the EI system helping employers, not workers, in Canada. We're going to change that.
L'honorable député de Saint-Hyacinthe,
Monsieur le
Bagat.
Président, les conservateurs ont causé d'énormes torts en coupant l'accès à l'assurance-emploi aux travailleurs en ayant le plus besoin. Dans ma région et dans de nombreuses régions du pays, en Atlantique, en Gaspésie, nos industries saisonnières sont des moteurs essentiels de l'économie. Les libéraux ont dénoncé haut et fort les réformes conservatrices de l'assurance-emploi. Maintenant au pouvoir, est-ce que le gouvernement s'engage à restaurer les 5 semaines additionnelles pour les travailleurs saisonniers?
Bravo.
The Honourable Minister of Employment.
Thank you, Monsieur President. Merci beaucoup. I am going to repeat. I'm trying to learn French. Sorry. I'm going to try and repeat that we are in the process of a massive review of the employment insurance system to modernize it so that it meets the needs of seasonal workers, vulnerable workers from coast to coast to coast. And we're in the process, so I'd ask all of you to participate in the EI review that's ongoing. Merci beaucoup.
I remind the Honourable Minister to direct her comments to the Chair, and as I said yesterday, when we say you, usually we're talking about the Speaker, and I get a little concerned. L'honorable député de Saint-Hyacinthe, Bagat.
Monsieur le Président, les gens ont besoin d'aide maintenant, pas de réponse évasive. Les travailleurs se souviennent encore aujourd'hui que les libéraux de Paul Martin et Jean Chrétien ont pigé à 2 mains sans scrupule dans la Caisse d'assurance-emploi pour équilibrer leur budget. Plus de 50 milliards pris à même les bénéfices auxquels les travailleurs avaient droit. On connaît tous l'ampleur des prochains déficits des libéraux. Peuvent-ils au moins répondre à une question très simple? Est-ce que le gouvernement planifie, oui ou non, de piger encore dans la Caisse d'assurance-emploi?
Honorable Ministre de l'Emploi.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Gives me the opportunity to remind the House that this is the government that ran on a platform to change EI system, which was modified in a set of mean-spirited changes by the previous government, which focused the system to help and subsidize businesses rather than dealing with the needs of Canadian workers. We're busy working on a system to modernize the program. Thank you.
Advocate Day, the New Westminster Burnaby.
Reviews do not put food on the table for unemployed workers, Mr. Speaker. That's the reality. Now, the Liberals voted for 360 hours in this House, and now they're opposed to that same measure. They promised to roll back all the bad Conservative measures, and now they don't seem to mind too much, a lot of those measures, and they promised to never, ever take money from unemployed workers again, and now they're opposing a House motion that actually forces them to keep their promise. At a time of growing unemployment and growing layoffs, why are they breaking their promises to Canadian unemployed workers?
The Honourable Minister of Employment.
Mr. Speaker, I want to promise the House of Commons and the citizens of Canada that we made a commitment to improve employment insurance, to actually make it a modern system that meets the needs of business and workers, which was a priority that the previous government ignored in their mandate. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Abbotsford.
Well, Mr. Speaker, we know that Liberal deficits are skyrocketing, balanced budgets are out the window, and the Prime Minister continues to spend on foreign climate change projects that are costing Canadians billions of dollars. And now we learn that the Minister of Environment has picked a fight with the Premiers of Saskatchewan and Yukon by forcing a harmful carbon tax on them. After all the Minister's rhetoric about cooperative federalism and all the warm and fuzzy platitudes about a new relationship with the provinces and territories, what happened to the Minister? What happened to sunny ways?
The Honourable Minister of Environment and Climate Change.
Thank you. I'd like to thank the honourable member for his question. And actually, I was delighted to share sunny ways with him in Paris, where we went and we did our part to tackle climate change.
Order. It's so nice. It's so nice to see members getting along so well. But please, let's have a little order. The Minister of Environment has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd just like to reiterate some quotes for the member opposite, who apparently believes in climate change. So from the CEOs of Shell, Total, and major oil and gas companies. We firmly believe that carbon pricing will discourage high carbon options and reduce uncertainty. We now need governments around the world to provide us with this framework.
The honourable member for Abbotsford.
Well, Mr. Speaker, does the minister not understand that Canadians did not give her a mandate to suck billions of dollars out of Western Canada to spend on Liberal climate change projects? It's clear that the minister's my way or the highway approach to federalism is quickly turning into another national energy plan fiasco. The premiers of Yukon and Saskatchewan have said a very clear no to a harmful carbon tax grab. When will the minister finally do what she promised and listen to all Canadian premiers?
The Honourable Minister of Environment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We're very delighted that next week that we will be sitting down, the Prime Minister will be sitting down with the premiers from the provinces and the territories to talk about how we're going to tackle climate change together. We believe that we need to be doing this together. The provinces and territories have shown leadership on climate change, and now it's time for us to step on a plate and do something, because the Conservatives did nothing for the last 10 years.
The Honourable Member for Fort McMurray-Cold Lake.
Mr. Speaker, northern communities are feeling a pressure of a weak economy, a lack of support to the resource sector, and cuts to the territorial transfers. Instead of moving to relieve this pressure, the Liberals have decided to increase it by introducing a carbon tax. Mr. Speaker, we all know a carbon tax is a tax on everything. With businesses failing and people losing their jobs, how does this Liberal government expect Northerners to absorb this tax?
The Honourable Minister of Environment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We were elected by Canadians to take action on climate change, something the previous government did nothing on. We are going to take action. We are going to be working with the provinces and territories. And in fact, 80% of Canadians will be living in a province or territory with a price on carbon as a result of the leadership of the provinces. We are going to take action, and we are going to do this in cooperation with the provinces and territories.
The honourable member for Fort McMurray Cold Lake.
Mr. Speaker, in the north, people depend on hydrocarbons. They fuel the planes that bring in the goods. They fuel the trucks that deliver those goods to communities. And they fuel the generators that provide electricity in many of the communities. Using hydrocarbons in the north is a matter of survival, not a luxury.
That's right.
With the price of goods in the north already much more expensive than the rest of Canada, why are the Liberals punishing hard-working Northerners?
The Honourable Minister of Environment.
Mr. Speaker, you know what's also happening in the north? The permafrost is melting. You know what happens then? That people's lives are changed. They can't do traditional hunting. Schools are now having to be closed because the ground they're on isn't stable. We need to take action on climate change, and we are going to take action because it's the right thing to do, and it'll also move us to a low-carbon future, create new innovations and new jobs.
The honourable member for Central Okanagan, Similkameen Nicola.
Mr. Speaker, we were able to build a consensus across the country on the need for a modern and comprehensive agreement on internal trade. We know that the deadline for a new agreement is fast approaching, and the current minister has recently met with his provincial counterparts on this subject. The only thing the Liberals have done since getting elected is to consult, and yes, more consultations. Can the minister confirm that the Liberals are not holding up the agreement by adding new demands, more red tape, or asking for excessive consultations?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Economic Development.
Mr. Speaker, for the last 10 years, the previous government said that they would act, but actually didn't do anything on internal trade. What we have done, Mr. Speaker, is that the minister has met with his provincial and territorial counterparts. They are working towards reducing barriers to improving that we'll have more economic growth, will bring prosperity, and we will have a much more innovative economy for the future from coast to coast to coast.
The honourable member for Foothills.
Mr. Speaker, earlier this week, the Saudi oil minister announced that OPEC is willing to ride out this downturn. In fact, they are hoping that this will force competitors like Canada right out of the business. With thousands of jobs being lost in Alberta and Saskatchewan, this Liberal government is content to continue to have foreign oil flow into eastern refineries. When will this Liberal government, Mr. Speaker, stand up, show the courage to approve and allow critical infrastructure like pipelines that create jobs?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Natural Resources.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank my colleague for the question. We have said many times in this House, we feel for the families of the oil resource-producing provinces in this country and the hardships that they're going through. There are things that we do not control that other countries make decisions on, and the global commodity prices are affecting all of us. We will continue, as we have said, to allow the National Energy Board to complete their very robust process, and as that process continues, we'll be happy to inform my colleague as it progresses. Thank you.
The honourable member for Cowichan, Malahat, Langford.
Yesterday, the member for Scarborough Southwest bizarrely accused opposition members of confusion around marijuana laws before he stirred the pot, once again saying, quote, "The only control that is in place is the criminal sanction for the production and trafficking of marijuana." Mr. Speaker, the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Justice seems to be telling Canadians that possession of marijuana is now legal. No wonder Canadians and law enforcement officials are confused. Can the Parliamentary Secretary now clear the haze and clarify his government's position on marijuana?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and let me be very clear that the laws of Canada are in effect. The respect for the rule of law is a foundational principle of both this House and of our nation, and until laws are changed by this House, the law is the law is the law.
Right on.
We have been clear that we are resolved to improve the controls of access to marijuana through strict regulation, and until a new and stronger regulatory regime can be put in place, we must rely on all existing laws to protect our communities and to keep our communities safe. And I would remind the member once again, the law is the law is the law.
Honorable député de Rimouski-Neigette, Témiscouata-les-Basses.
Monsieur le Président, ça fait juste confirmer que depuis le début, le gouvernement nage en pleine improvisation dans le dossier de la marijuana. Le premier ministre dit que ça va être légal d'ici un an. Le secrétaire parlementaire, lui, doute que ça va arriver d'ici la fin du mandat. Et pendant ce temps, les Canadiens continuent d'être victimes de lois dépassées, comme ce citoyen de ma circonscription qui devra faire 1 an de prison pour avoir produit son propre cannabis. Alors, je pose la question, si le gouvernement peut faire la distinction entre décriminalisation et légalisation, pourquoi ne fait-il pas la bonne chose en décriminalisant dès maintenant la possession de cannabis pour des fins personnelles?
Absolument.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The only controls that currently exist into the access that our kids have to marijuana is the laws that currently exist in this country. And it would be irresponsible to put our kids and our communities at risk by removing all controls until a new, stronger, clearer regulatory regime can be put in place.
The Honourable Member for Red Deer-Lacombe.
Mr. Speaker, the Government House Leader rose in his place yesterday to speak about the ethical screens put in place for the Justice Minister. The ethical screen, however, does not prevent the Justice Minister from discussing or even voting on projects at the Cabinet table brought forward by her husband's clients. Mr. Speaker, will the Justice Minister finally recognize the holes in her so-called ethical screen and step down from her Cabinet committees?
Hear, hear. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, we'll take advice on the appropriate ethical screens from the Ethics Commissioner. I can inform the House that the Minister of Justice and her husband have met with the Ethics Commissioner, and she has confirmed that all the appropriate and required compliance measures are in place, and the Minister and her husband will follow them meticulously.
The Honourable Member for Red Deer-Lacombe.
Mr. Speaker, yesterday this House heard the Justice Minister was the former chair of the First Nations Financial Authority, and now her husband, conveniently, is their paid lobbyist. We now know that this government is hiding behind ethical smokescreens. The Justice Minister sits on 6 cabinet committees, and she is directly responsible for funding the Aboriginal Justice Strategy. Mr. Speaker, it's clear to Canadians she is in a conflict. When will she do the right thing and recuse herself from these cabinet committees?
Hear, hear. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Speaker, only that member would find an ethical smokescreen on the Internet. The Ethics Commissioner has in fact posted that all the compliance measures are in place. The Minister will be following them. Let me be clear. Dr. Raybould has 30 years of experience.
The member knows that we don't use personal names in the House. We refer to the Minister by their title. Oh, it's her husband. Excuse me. Yes, that you can do.
Mr. Speaker, I did know that. That's why I was referring to the Minister's husband, Dr. Raybould, who has a 30-year experience, a PhD from Cambridge in a very specific aspect of business. His business is entirely compliant with the Minister's ethical obligations. The Ethics Commissioner has confirmed that, and that member shouldn't be putting spurious accusations.
The Honourable Member for Renfrew, Nipissing, Pembroke.
Mr. Speaker, David McNaughton was Dalton McGuinty's right-hand man and helped to run Ontario's economy into the ground. He was the boss of the current Prime Minister's Chief of Staff at the lobbying firm Strategy Corp. For this, he was rewarded with the job as Canada's Prime Minister to the U.S. He recently met with the American ambassador in that role. Problem is, he's still listed as the chairman of that same lobbying company. How can the Liberals think it's ethical to be a lobbyist and ambassador at the same time?
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, the member knows full well that appointments as head of missions are subject to the appropriate controls from the Ethics Commissioner. Obviously, the ambassador would have ensured that all of his previous business arrangements are in compliance with his new roles, and the Ethics Commissioner is the person whose advice we always follow on those matters.
For Renfrew, Nipissing, Pembroke.
Mr. Speaker, Strategy Corp lobbies the Prime Minister's office, the Privy Council office, Foreign Affairs, and countless other departments. They're even lobbying for the Finance Minister's own company, the firm Morneau Chappelle. The ambassador designate is still the chairman of a major lobbying firm that lobbies the very people who appointed him, including the Prime Minister's office. What is it that the Liberals just don't understand about conflicts of interest?
Government House Leader.
Speaker, the idea that people on this side of the House have any lessons to take from the other side of the House with respect to following the conflict of interest regime is a bit rich. What the member is obviously having trouble understanding is that the Conflict of Interest Act and the code that's applicable is applied by the Independent Ethics Commissioner. Now, if they seem to think there's a significant problem here, they're free to go and meet with the Ethics Commissioner or, in fact, file a formal complaint. The fact that they haven't done so confirms that they know there's no material whatsoever except a question period to stand up and make those accusations.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Juste avant les élections, les conservateurs ont imposé, dans le plus grand secret, aux surprises, un nouveau régime financier pour tous les traités modernes. Cela va à l'encontre de ces mêmes traités, Monsieur le Président. Les libéraux se sont engagés à traiter avec les peuples autochtones sur la base de relations de nation à nation. C'est maintenant le temps de le démontrer, Monsieur le Président, et de tenir parole. Le gouvernement va-t-il suspendre l'application de cette politique totalement injuste et surtout illégale?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary for Indigenous and Northern Affairs.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank my colleague for his question. We recognize, Mr. Speaker, that the fiscal arrangement that was in place by the former government is not a fair process. It was not done in consultation with First Nations people. In fact, it was imposed upon them. We are undertaking to look at that full fiscal arrangement. We have met with a number of Indigenous governments across Canada and will continue to do so and look forward to implementing a new fiscal framework.
The Honourable Member for Saskatoon West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thousands of Indigenous children abused in residential schools have been denied justice after the government used a legal loophole against them. It has been a month since the Liberals promised urgent action. Not only has this not happened, but today we learned the Oversight Committee won't investigate why the government was allowed to use a legal technicality to deny these legitimate claims. Will the Justice Minister now direct her officials to abandon their legal loopholes and instead start working to bring justice to these victims?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister... No. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister...
John, go ahead.
...of Justice.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. We certainly are aware of the situation raised by the honourable member. The Department of Justice officials will continue to work with First Nations to resolve these conflicts and these issues. In any given situation, it is ultimately up to the tribunal in question. But we are apprised of the situation and will continue to work cooperatively to get it resolved.
Honourable Member for Scarborough Rouge Park.
Mr. Speaker, 9 in 10 Canadians in the private sector are employed by small businesses across this country. Small businesses are key drivers of the Canadian economy and a vital part of our growth. Could the Minister of Small Business and Tourism explain what this government is doing to encourage and support gender balance among Canada's entrepreneurs and small businesses?
The Honourable Minister of Small Business and Tourism.
Mr. Speaker, I would like to thank the honourable member for his question, and I agree. Entrepreneurs are key to Canada's prosperity. This week I presented eBay Canada's Entrepreneur Awards, and for the first time, all 3 recipients were women. This government is committed to increasing opportunities for women entrepreneurs, young people, and for underrepresented groups. We are supporting entrepreneurs through programs like BizPal, Canada Business Network, Can Export, and we are committed to reducing the administrative burden so entrepreneurs can grow their business, create jobs, and lead the world in innovation. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Sarnia-Lambton.
Mr. Speaker, Kevin Fram is a close personal friend of the Irvings. He's told us that. But as Chief of Staff for the Fisheries Minister, he let himself be lobbied by the Irvings anyway. In spite of that serious lapse in judgment, the Liberal House Leader then hired him as senior advisor. Mr. Speaker, with one minister after another in a conflict of interest, how can Canadians have any confidence in this government?
The Honourable Minister of Fisheries.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Looks like on Friday today we found another fan of that book, Something from Nothing. Mr. Speaker, as Minister, I and my team held many meetings with stakeholders on issues related to my mandate. The individual that the member is talking about was a fine public servant at the time in my department and attended these meetings as my acting Chief of Staff. He was doing his job, Mr. Speaker. He did it well. All the rules were followed. The system works. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Sarnia-Lambton.
Mr. Speaker, the Liberal House Leader is punching holes in his supposed ethics screen with every hire. Case in point is Senior Advisor Kevin Fram, who shares the same glaring conflict of interest as his boss. We know this because Fram declared his close personal friendship with the Irvings over a decade ago. Mr. Speaker, how can the House Leader possibly maintain any credibility on ethics when his entire office is tied to the Irvings?
The Honourable Minister of Fisheries.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And as the government House Leader said, it's really hard to take ethical advice from that side of the House. You know, and I'm sure myself and all Canadians would agree with that. And as a House Leader said, if Mr. Speaker, if they do believe they have something other than standing up here in question period, trying to make people look bad, why don't they file a complaint? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable member for Banff-Airdrie.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Democratic Institutions doesn't seem to take the democratic part of the Title II seriously. Alberta elects senators through Senate nominee elections. However, when appearing at a Senate committee on Wednesday night, the minister confirmed that the Liberals have no intention of abiding by this democratic process. So why won't the Liberal Prime Minister accept the Alberta Senate election results? Why are they thumbing their nose at Albertans?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary for Democratic Institutions.
Mr. Speaker, for over a decade, Canadians have waited for real change when it comes to the Senate. We are ready to deliver. And let me tell you exactly what that democratic process looks like. It means that every single Canadian from every corner of this nation is going to be given the opportunity to apply to be part of the Canadian Senate, and finally for that to be a merit-based, non-partisan process that ensures that we have the highest caliber of candidates placed. And I assure the member, if he awaits that process, if he sees the quality of candidates that will come from it, he's going to see just how well it works.
The Honourable Member for Regina Capel.
Mr. Speaker, we just heard from the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Justice tell the House that, quote, a law is a law is a law, and that all laws need to be followed in Canada. Now, we are hearing from many on-reserve First Nations people who are disturbed that the government is not enforcing the law, the First Nations accountability law that allows First Nations people to know how their band is spending their money. So if a law is a law is a law, I'd like to ask the Parliamentary Secretary, will they enforce the law that already exists to give First Nations people the access to the information on how their money is spent?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary for Indigenous and Northern Affairs.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And everyone, including First Nations governments, wants to see increased transparency, and we certainly do as well. Mr. Speaker, we are working in partnership with First Nations leadership and organizations to ensure that we have the proper process in place. We do not believe in a top-down process. We believe in working together collaboratively to implement solutions to these transparency requirements. And in fact, Mr. Speaker, they are required to table these documents with their band councils.
The Honourable Member for Vancouver East.
For years, successive Liberal and Conservative governments mismanaged Canada's immigration program, creating huge backlogs and long wait times, who are forced to live in uncertainty or to be separated for long periods of time. It currently takes nearly a year and a half to sponsor a child and more than 2 years to sponsor a spouse. Can the minister explain and inform this House what concrete actions he will take to shorten wait times and to help reunite families quickly?
The Honourable Minister of Immigration.
I thank the Honourable Member for her question, and I am entirely in agreement with her that the current situation is a mess when families' waiting times have ballooned, mushroomed over the last decade, and it is my single top priority to bring those processing times down sharply over coming years. And the House will hear, Canadians will hear, that we will have a very concrete, specific plan, specific targets to get this job done as quickly as possible.
The honourable member for Vancouver East.
Platitudes are no replacement for action, Mr. Speaker. As a proud immigrant Canadian, I know the importance of having family around you when you're new to a country. Parents and grandparents are key supports in a family unit, but some families are waiting up to 10 years to be reunited, and that's when they're able to submit an application at all. This program needs more than a simple increase to the application quota. It needs a total overhaul. Will the minister fix the program so that families can be reunited quickly?
The Honourable Minister of Immigration.
Well, as I said just before, I basically agree with the propositions of the honourable member, and I would point out that in our platform we committed to double from 5,000 to 10,000 the number of parents and grandparents that could apply every year. That has been done. We promised to increase the budget for family class unification. That may well be done in the budget to come. So we are on track on this, but we appreciate the urgency that she conveys, and I can promise that we will move as quickly as possible to achieve these central.
The honourable member for Kitchener-Conestoga.
Mr. Speaker, the Canadian Cancer Society recently issued a report that shed some very discouraging light on the state of palliative care in Canada. But instead of dealing with this sad fact first, as their #1 priority, the Liberal government seems to be focusing all their efforts on physician-assisted suicide. Why is the Liberal government working so hard on a plan to allow living people to die rather than helping dying people to live?
Great.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Justice.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to thank this member for the question and also for his excellent work on the Joint Committee on Physician-Assisted Death. As he knows very well, we've been placed in a bit of a situation where there's a hard deadline to meet. So the efforts towards coming to a response in the Carter decision is one that is driven by the court. It is not exclusive to the efforts that need to be taken to improve the system of palliative care in this country. These are not mutually exclusive. We are and we should be working on both at the same time.
The honourable member for Langley Aldergrove.
Mr. Speaker, Canadian seniors have worked hard to build our great country. Seniors deserve dignity, our thanks, and our respect. 1 in 6 Canadians is a senior. Seniors are also one of Canada's most vulnerable groups. The Liberal euthanasia plan will put our seniors at risk, especially seniors with dementia. The Liberal euthanasia plan is a dangerous plan that ignores instructions from the Supreme Court of Canada. Why isn't the Prime Minister protecting our most vulnerable Canadian seniors?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And again, I'd like to thank that member for the question and for his excellent work on the committee. The tone of the question is truly unfortunate because the committee did work so well together, and we are going to be relying on all parliamentarians to take very seriously the responsibility that the minister identified to protect our most vulnerable while at the same time respect the decision of the court. That is a process that has been given a key initial stage with this report, but it's a process that will continue through the crafting and the debate of the legislation here and in the Senate.
The honourable member for Calgary Confederation.
Mr. Speaker, a man I know personally and consider a friend now faces 11 years behind bars in a foreign country. Indonesia's Supreme Court has overturned the acquittal of Canadian teacher Neil Bandelman. The crimes he's accused of are unfounded and unwarranted. Rather than hearing platitudes about the Canadian Embassy being in contact with the family, I would like to ask the Minister if he has spoken to his Indonesian counterpart, and what assurances was he able to secure that this miscarriage of justice will not continue?
Parliamentary Secretary for Foreign Affairs, Consular Affairs.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I now thank the honourable member for his question. The Government of Canada is deeply concerned and dismayed by the decision of the Supreme Court of Indonesia to overturn the acquittal of Mr. Bandelman. I have personally spoken with the brother of Mr. Bandelman yesterday, and I reiterated our commitment to work with him on this case. The minister late last night spoke with his counterpart, the Indonesian Foreign Minister, and reiterated our point of view that this was a miscarriage of justice and that this case will have serious consequences on Indonesia's reputation for people to live, work and travel abroad to Indonesia.
Honorable député de Miramichi Grand Lake.
Monsieur le Président, le ministre des Affaires étrangères était à l'étranger cette semaine afin de discuter d'importants dossiers internationaux et de sécurité avec ses homologues. Le secrétaire parlementaire du ministre des Affaires étrangères peut-elle informer cette Chambre des différentes rencontres auxquelles il a participé et la réaction de la part de la communauté internationale en ce qui trait à l'important travail qu'accomplit le Canada à l'étranger?
Secrétaire parlementaire du ministre des Affaires étrangères.
Je remercie mon collègue pour la question. This week, the minister met with his German counterpart and discussed pressing global challenges such as the fight against ISIL, mass migration, and the situation in Ukraine. In Turkey, the minister participated in the high-level partnership forum on Somalia, where Canada received much praise from the President of Turkey for Canada's engagement in the Syrian refugee crisis. Monsieur le Président, sous ce gouvernement, nos partenaires internationaux considèrent le Canada comme un allié fort, un collaborateur et un ami. Merci.
The honourable member for Calgary Forest Lawn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the cyclone that hit Fiji last weekend has caused massive damage and left a trail of destruction that requires a major recovery effort. International teams are being deployed as we speak to assist Fijians in the time of need. Canada is a home to a dynamic Fijian diaspora, many of them in my own riding, and they stand ready to lend their support to any government effort. Can the Parliamentary Secretary for International Development tell Canadians what the government is doing to assist Fiji in its recovery efforts?
Honourable Parliamentary Secretary for International Development.
Je remercie mon collègue pour son excellente question. Monsieur le Président, je pense que mes collègues se joindront à moi pour exprimer la compassion du Canada envers le peuple fidjien. Le Canada a fait une première contribution via le Fonds d'assistance d'urgence en cas de désastre pour appuyer l'opération de secours d'urgence de la Croix-Rouge. Notre ambassadeur en Nouvelle-Zélande est en contact régulier avec les autorités fidjiennes. Nous continuons de surveiller la situation pour nous assurer que les besoins humanitaires sont comblés et pour fournir une aide supplémentaire si nécessaire. Merci.
The honourable member for Surrey Centre.
Mr. Speaker, and I reiterate the member on the other side's question, Cyclone Winston, a Category 5 hurricane, just struck the island nation of Fiji. Thousands of homes were destroyed and even more people have been displaced. My riding of Surrey Centre, along with many others across this country, are home to thousands of Fijian Canadians who have loved ones in Fiji. Canada has a long and rich history of responding when our friends are in need. Would the Minister of International Development please tell the House what Canada is doing to assist?
Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, I would like to thank the honourable member from Surrey Centre for his question and his dedication to this file. We all join in expressing Canada's sympathy to the people of Fiji who are dealing with the devastating impacts of Cyclone Winston. Canada has made an initial contribution through the Emergency Disaster Assistance Fund to support the Red Cross's emergency relief operation in Fiji. We are providing emergency shelter and essential relief items to approximately 5,000 people affected. We are in regular contact with officials in Fiji to ensure that their current needs are being addressed and are prepared to support a larger appeal when the longer-term needs are better known. Thank you.
Honorable député de Richmond-Arthabasca.
Monsieur le Président, depuis mercredi, on sait que la Cour juge qu'il est acceptable de cultiver de la marijuana médicale chez soi et tout le monde sait que les libéraux ont l'intention de rendre cette substance disponible pour tous. Donc, j'imagine qu'ils considèrent qu'il sera légal de cultiver du cannabis dans son sol ou même dans son jardin à côté des carottes, des tomates et des légumes. Alors, si c'est le cas, Monsieur le Président, la marijuana sera plus accessible aux enfants et difficilement contrôlable. Qu'est-ce que le gouvernement compte faire pour garder la marijuana hors de la portée de nos enfants?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary for Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And the member opposite is well aware that the Allard decision was for medical marijuana for people that are ill and they need, and it's prescribed by medical professionals. And they must have access to it. The LR decision was, of course, released, and it is important that we take necessary steps and time to examine it. And we will be consulting with our colleagues, the Minister of Justice, as well as the Attorney General of Canada on this court's ruling. And once we've had time to study the implications, the government will be considering the next steps. Thank you.
Monsieur le Président, toute la semaine, le ministre des Transports nous a répété qu'il était fier et très heureux d'être content qu'Air Canada n'ait pas à respecter la loi. Par conséquent, 1800 travailleurs d'AVEOS ayant perdu leur emploi n'ont plus de recours. Le ministre a fait le choix de plaire aux délinquants. Plutôt que de nous servir la même cassette aujourd'hui, je laisse la chance au gouvernement de nous donner une réponse respectueuse des travailleuses et de leurs familles. Pourquoi refuse-t-il d'appliquer sa propre loi?
Honorable secrétaire parlementaire, le ministre des Transports.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The Government of Canada is pleased by Air Canada's announcement of its intention to purchase Bombardier C-Series aircraft. The C-Series is a major advancement in aviation, and I'm certain this addition to the Air Canada fleet will be a major benefit both to that company and to Canada's aerospace sector. I further commend Air Canada's intention to facilitate the creation of a centre of excellence on aircraft maintenance in Quebec, which will create additional employment opportunities in this sector. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable député de Repentigny.
Monsieur le Président, en 2012, lors d'une manifestation à laquelle le premier ministre actuel participait, il a donné sa parole aux travailleurs d'AVEOS et je cite « C'est tellement de valeur de devoir manifester pour demander à un gouvernement de droit et d'ordre de respecter la loi. » Plus récemment, il a dit « C'est pas vrai que la meilleure ressource est dans la terre en quelque part. Notre meilleure ressource est la ressource humaine. » Est-ce que c'est ça, la parole donnée d'un premier ministre?
Honorable secrétaire parlementaire.
Mr. Speaker, I reiterate that, of course, the Government of Canada is pleased by Air Canada's announcement of its intention to purchase the Bombardier C-Series aircraft. It's a major advancement in aviation. I'm certain this addition to the Air Canada fleet will be of major benefit, both to that company and to Canada's aerospace sector across the country. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable député de la Pointe-Lille.
Monsieur le Président, le groupe chargé de l'examen de la loi du transport mise en place par les conservateurs a fait son rapport hier. On y retrouve des recommandations loufoques comme de remplacer les pilotes du Saint-Laurent par des drones. Mais à notre grand étonnement, on ne retrouve aucune proposition pour renforcer la sécurité ferroviaire. Aucune. Plutôt que d'écouter les conservateurs, le gouvernement fédéral va-t-il enfin écouter les villes du Québec en exigeant notamment que les compagnies ferroviaires les informent en temps réel de ce qui se passe chez nous? Et va-t-il exiger le retrait des wagons?
L'honorable secrétaire parlementaire des Transports.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm happy to be able to talk about the Canada Transportation Act. The report from the Canada Transportation Act review embodies many months of hard work and significant public consultations. We're pleased that stakeholders across Canada were active in providing their perspectives on the challenges and opportunities facing transportation in the years ahead. And in the coming weeks and months, this government will be engaging with public and private stakeholders with a view to setting a forward agenda for transportation in Canada in the future. Thank you.
This concludes question period for today, and I thank members for their generally excellent conduct today.